I recently returned from a trip to Malta, a small island nation in the Mediterranean about 60 kilometers south of Sicily. You might be thinking, why Malta? And really I have no good reason, except for that I was looking for a place to go after a friend's wedding in London, and my cousin who lives in Germany laughed in my face when I told him that I wanted to go to Northern Europe in November. I absolutely love traveling. It's possibly my favorite thing to do. Malta was the 22nd country I visited, and I can honestly say that I never tire of seeing new places. I love eating new food, I love meeting new people, and I love constantly learning that if plan A or plan B or plan C don't work, there are plenty of other plans, maybe 23 or so more, to try. I always learn so much about myself and the world around me when I travel, and I imagine some of you might feel the same. Sometimes even traveling to another part of the county brings that refreshing feeling of newness and challenge. While in Malta, I got to visit the world's oldest structures, the Gigantia temples, a protected UNESCO site in Gozo, Malta. On a beautiful sunny day, I stood within the remnants of walls that had been there for almost 6,000 years. The structure is older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and it's pretty indescribable to stand in something so ancient. I pictured the people who built the temples. What did they eat? What rituals did they participate in? The wheel hadn't even been invented and no metal tools were available, and yet something so incredible was constructed out of very few resources. My trip to Malta was unbelievable. But I have to tell you, I absolutely hate flying. I'm not afraid of flying. I just hate sitting still for multiple hours on end at a time. And oh, there's nothing worse than when that plane lands and you have to wait for everyone in front of you to get off. I don't get impatient often, but if you ever want to see me agitated, it's probably going to be on a plane. I find it funny that my favorite thing in the world is predicated upon doing one of my least favorite things. Every time I want to see a new place in the world, I have to sit on a plane for 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 hours. The agony is real, y'all. I don't sleep on planes. There's snoring and coughing people, cramped quarters, the list goes on, and it's only because of the reward of the destination that I put myself through that pain. Our reading this morning from Reverend Deschler from Isaiah reminds us of what is to come. As someone who grew up in the desert, the vivid imagery of a dry desert going into bloom is such a promising metaphor. I can picture those purples and reds and oranges blooming out of those spiky, dry cacti. When the heat of summer and the tirelessly long days are heavy on our minds, our bodies, our souls, the promise of rain and relief is a welcomed event. And likewise, the promise of the coming Christ child is the promise of blooms in the desert. We hear the stories of those early Hebrews awaiting the Messiah, awaiting the one who would come to be a light in the world. And in our world today, we too can find ourselves like the Hebrews, wondering when the time will come where it won't be so painful. When will the wars stop? When will every human being have access to health care? When will justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream? Our Christian tradition reminds us that both our Jewish and our Christian ancestors have spent many nights in that desert, seeking the promise of those blooms to come. We remember the times where they had to listen carefully for that quiet whisper of God. The epistle to the Philippians, which Eduardo read a selection from this morning, was authored by Paul about 10 years following his first visit to Philippi. He was familiar with the community. He was seeking to reassure them that whatever pain, whatever struggle, be it disease or arguments amongst the people, that there was nothing for the people to worry about, that there was a promise for better news to come. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. The early Philippians were experiencing their own season of Advent, a time of preparation and waiting for the promise of more to come. United Methodist pastor Jan L. Richardson writes, "The season of Advent means there is something on the horizon, the likes of which we have never seen before. What is possible is to not see it, to miss it, to turn just as it brushes past you. And you begin to grasp what it was that you missed, like Moses in the cleft of the rock, watching God's back fade into the distance. So stay, sit, linger, tarry, ponder, wait, behold, and wonder. There will be time enough for running, time enough for rushing, for worrying, for pushing, but for now, stay, wait. Something is on the horizon." So as we continue through this season of Advent, I think about the people who built the Jugantia temples. I think about their hard work and dedication. I think about their perseverance and their commitment. What it must have been like to work on a project like those temples. What it must have been like to work on something so lasting and so major in the course of human history. What it must have been like to only have the promise of something amazing to come. I imagine that these folks did a lot of planning and preparing. They had to have some idea of how to build something that would endure the weather and the test of time. They must have been impatient as the project wore on. And I imagine that some folks even died along the way, never getting to see the finished product. And so it is with Advent. We are walking through this time with the promise of something amazing to come, the promise of the birth of the Christ child every year. Friends, the early people of Malta were not the only ones who dedicated their days to something bigger than themselves. Civil rights leaders like Bayard Rustin, a gay black man who had a rough hand dealt to him, worked diligently to end discrimination. He didn't do it for the fame. He didn't do it for immediate gratification. He didn't even do it for himself. No, he did it so that someday there might exist a world in which equity and compassion would be commonplace. He did it for the future. He did it for the promise of good news to come. In fact, we too have the challenge of participating in something bigger than ourselves. And come to think of it, no matter how painful and frustrating the waiting and watching on the plane is, there have been some really positive experiences along the way. I've met a lot of really interesting people doing their own waiting for wherever they are going. From grandmothers going to visit their firstborn grandchild, people moving to new places, travelers, adventurers, those going to bury loved ones, lovers coming and going from their partners who live across the world, and as many stories as there are people. My journey would not be the same without each of these souls that I have shared a row with on the plane. And waiting has given me time to prepare myself for my own journey to come. So where are the places that you want to practice this waiting and this watching? Do you believe in the promise of ending homelessness in Orange County? Will you participate this Advent in working to make that promise a reality? Do you believe in the promise of reconciliation with a family member? Will you pick up a phone or a pen to help move yourself into that reality? Do you believe in the promise of seeing fewer young people commit suicide? This Advent season, will you reach out to those young folks or get involved in an anti-bullying campaign? Whatever the promise you see coming this Christmas, get ready. Be prepared. Watch and wait as these amazing things can truly become reality if we all do our part to make it so. This Advent, I know it will be painful not to sing Christmas carols, Renee Boyam, until Advent is over. I know that the preparation